Welcome to the Attention Deficit Disorder Expert Podcast Series by Attitude Magazine.
Hi, I'm Susan Kaufman, and you're listening to Attitude Magazine's ADHD Experts audio broadcast today. You know, there's just nothing more painful for any of us than watching our children struggle to make friends. The topic of today's session is how to help children learn social cues and improve their social thinking. We are so pleased to welcome back Michelle Garcia Winner, who will address social thinking in the classroom, how to help your ADHD child read and respond to hidden social rules. Let me just interject there that this is not just for ADHD children, it's for any child or adult, for that matter, who has problems reading social cues. Michelle is a speech and language pathologist by training. She specializes in the treatment of students with social and cognitive challenges. She's based in San Jose, California, where she has a private practice, but she's a very popular speaker and prolific author, speaking all over the country and internationally. So we're very fortunate to have her expertise today. Have a look at her website. It's www.socialthinking.com. Tons of great information, free articles, information about her upcoming talks around the country, and the numerous books that she's published. Michelle, thank you so much for joining us today. We're very grateful to have you back. Michelle, before you start, let me just tell you about one question that came in over the transom today, which I think might be interesting to you. This is from a teacher who says she's a speech and language pathologist at high school, and she works with a young man who's got both ADHD and Asperger's. He's developed a reputation of stalking girls. He's really unaware of the way the girl might feel, but what he describes as just being incredibly kind to her. She's very worried about him. She's concerned for the fact that he is not, doesn't understand what's happening. And so I wanted to toss that one out to you as you get started, because it seemed like a poignant and painful question that has been posted to the website.
All right. Well, thanks for sharing that. Unfortunately, a lot of the work that I get involved with is pretty painful, as, you know, social is part of the emotional learning process. And, when I drill down on why we even use social skills, it's all about how we make people feel. And so when people, due to learning disabilities, may be making other people feel uncomfortable, they end up having their own set of really difficult feelings, as well as the family. And sometimes the families are more aware of how painful it is than the kids are. But with that, I'm gonna come back to that question, as it's going to relate to a tool I'm going to talk about today. So in today's talk, reading and responding to hidden social rules. I just want to back up and say social thinking is this really big kind of umbrella of a concept. And last year when I presented on it, I think I gave the definition of what social thinking is. And what I decided to do this time, because I only have 10, 15 minutes before we open it up to questions, is to just give an idea of a specific tool people can use and to tell you a little bit more about social thinking. So let me just start with telling you how this all came about. So it started in a high school district. Next year will be our 20th year, my 20th year since I began creating this treatment. And I started creating the treatment because I started in the field in the late 70s with classically autistic folks who were nonverbal and minimally verbal. And then when I started working in the high school in the mid-90s, I found that my students were not responding to these simple behavior plans, that they were arguing. They said they didn't care how they made people feel. They weren't caring what impression they were making, and they didn't like thinking about others. And so the traditional social skills we were taught weren't really helping them. And then when I looked out to the other fields to see what was available, I found that teachings were very superficial, but my kids' issues were really deep, and social is really complicated. So I started thinking more actively about this and turning to a lot of the literature. And so I really started asking a lot of questions like, what are social skills? How do they develop? Why do we use them? And where I learned a lot was actually in anthropology, cultural linguistics, not in the field of ADHD and not in the field of autism or related disabilities. That I found that we had created this treatment idea of social skills, but the mental health workers, teachers, speech pathologists, behaviorists, it seemed very rare that people were actually studying the topic of social skills. And so I also realized that there's a really different need for treatment for folks who have language and significant learning issues and those who have solid to high learning abilities and language abilities, and that when we become more sophisticated learners, we learn from the thinking process. And that, the last time I gave a webinar, I talked about this definition of social thinking. With social thinking, we think about ourselves, we think about others and their intentions, their motives, our motives, how they're thinking about us, how we're all feeling about this. And then the next part is we adapt our behaviors based on how we want people to think about us as it relates to a specific situation, because we're always looking at the situation to try to figure out what's expected, which I'm going to get to. And then the whole point of doing all of this, thinking about each other's thinking, figuring out what behaviors we should be using are not memorized, but it's basically a set of, really complex problem-solving skills. It involves executive functioning in a huge way. And that, the outcome of all of this is how it makes people feel, which I was mentioning earlier. So there's a huge emotional element wrapped into all the social skills. And so for me to start teaching this, I realized that, you have to explain some of this stuff. So this is what we call a differentiated instruction. This is really an instruction for our very solid to high level learners. The gifted community uses our work solidly, just as the mainstream community does. So I was just mentioning, when we're going into a situation, like imagine being a kid walking into a classroom that morning. It's never exactly the same. People are talking about different things. Something unusual may be happening. Perhaps there's a substitute teacher that's standing there. That the first thing you have to do whenever you enter a social situation is you have to actually assess what the situation is, or it's not necessarily the environment. Like, you can't say that there's rules that follow a room, so you can't say the rules are always the same in a classroom, but in the situation where you're just entering and getting ready for teaching, there's a set of what we call hidden rules. Brenda Smith-Miles and her team wrote a book years ago, which I love, the book. It's called Hidden Curriculum, but the only piece I don't love is that they call it hidden curriculum. I don't think our kids know what a lot of kids don't know what a curriculum is when they're younger, but they do understand the concept of rules. So I call these the hidden rules for a situation. And it's the hidden rules about, there's a new sub, we have to keep an eye on her to figure out what's expected from us. It's the hidden rules that help us to figure out what the behavioral expectations are. And when you read that first question to me today, when you're talking about someone who's stalking females on campus, and he's really seems very unaware of his behavior, but he's making other people very uncomfortable. This is a guy who probably has very weak social attention and is very tuned into what he wants, which would be, he's lusting or really wanting to be related, to a girl in a sexual way, or just in a keen interest. But he doesn't understand the hidden rules. And what part of the hidden rules is not only what's expected, but how are people reading me in this situation? How do I want people to think about me? So we're going to go into this just a little bit. So this is what I was just mentioning. The hidden rules are in every situation. And so imagine like a classroom. There isn't one set of rules. You have to get ready for class to begin. That's a different set of social rules, and what to do during teacher talk time, different from classroom discussion time, different from individual work time, group time. Get ready for recess if you're in elementary school. What do you do at recess? Or if you're in middle school, high school, what do you do when you're hanging out with kids? That you can't just, even like we like to put together big old behavior plans that are just one behavior plan that go across the whole day. It's really not going to work at a very sophisticated level, because we need to adapt our behaviors effectively for each situation that we encounter. So that's what we're focusing on. Families who are at home listening to this, think about your house. There's hidden rules for getting ready for dinner, different from eating dinner, different from cleaning up, getting ready for homework, doing your homework, sharing family time, sharing the TV set or other technology, how long, video gaming, what are the hidden rules, getting ready for bed, all of those things. And so again, we find it's really important to break this down for our students and be able to talk based on the situation, what are the expectations. So I created this tool years ago, and I won't tell you all the background why, and I'm going to give you a very short version of it, but we have a free article on it on our website. And our website, socialthinking.com, if you go to What's Social Thinking, you'll see a lot of articles right now listed down the left side, and you'll see one called Social Behavior Mapping, which, long story short, I was realizing that our students were not making a connection between their behavior, how it was making people feel, and think, how people were reacting to them based on how their behaviors were making people feel and think, and then they weren't seeing that how people reacted to them was affecting their behavior themselves and how they were responding. So I wanted to create a graphic tool that created a visual map. As much as I work with very talkative kids, when you're teaching them, you actually don't want to always be talking a lot because they'll start arguing with you or disagreeing or just talking about it, but it gets in the way of the actual message. So I'm going to show you this template in a minute. So there's 3 components to social behavior map. The first one is you identify the situation. You identify in that situation what is expected versus unexpected behavior. Most people talk about this as appropriate versus inappropriate. From the get-go, with my higher level kids, all ages, I don't like the words appropriate, inappropriate, because we hardly ever tell kids they're doing something appropriate. But we often tell them they're doing things inappropriate, which basically we're saying to them it's an emotional judgment call. When we say it's inappropriate, it means we're upset. And I wanted to detangle that because I wanted my students to be able to be better observers of, first of all, what's the situation, and how do I figure out what the expectations are, what's expected and what's unexpected in the situation, and then we can talk about the emotions after it. So then we explain the reactions in the second part of the map. So for example, a situation, let's talk about elementary school, standing in line for recess. And then on the map, which I'll show you, I should have shown you the picture to start with, but there's a template I'm going to show you. There we're going to identify, you're typically going to start with the unexpected behaviors to figure out what is expected. So one of the things us adults have a hard time with is we have a hard time figuring out how to articulate what is expected. We're really good at talking about what is unexpected. So behavioral research shows 90% of the time we will bust somebody for doing what's wrong, but we hardly ever pay attention to what people are doing that's right. So if we're standing in line and some kids are having some challenges, we're going to call those the unexpected behaviors. And examples may be pushing others, body and eyes faced away from the line, front of the line, talking to others or talking loudly to self, insisting on going first, wandering away from the line. So then we're going to take whatever we decide is unexpected, and we're just going to find what is the expectation that's being, not followed. So, for example, stand in line, body facing towards the front, quiet body, not touching others, quiet voice, accept that others will get turns to go first in line. And one of the ways we teach others others go first is we encourage teachers to create a go first calendar. It takes a little work up front, but it's way better than dealing with all of these alligator tiers of kids who think they should be going first. And on the calendar, it assigns each child their go first day or go first time in the day, if there's different people who get to go first in line on a day. You just list it out so kids start to see that there's reciprocity to all of this stuff. Our kids with social learning challenges have a hard time, while they understand that that they have expectations for everybody else, they have a really hard time understanding that people have the same expectations for them. So while they may totally get that another kid should not always go first, they don't understand why they shouldn't always go first. That's some of the challenges. I'm sure there's a number of you who can relate to that, as that's common with a number of ADHD kids. So then we have this chart that lists the 4 columns, and so if the expected behavior is stand in line, body facing towards the front of the line, just like we talked about, how does that make people feel? And now we're going to write out some emotion words: calm, good, pleased. How do they treat you? And this is where I just kind of break it down. In general, they have a calm, I'm always asking, how does their voice sound? How does their face look? What else might be attached to that? So calm voice, calm face. And you may be getting a compliment. You may not. You may be getting a compliment. Often I'll write there, kids are more likely to include you in their group. And how do you feel? All my students, whether they're teenagers, adults, younger kids, will tell me they feel pretty much the same way as they made other people feel. They feel calm, they feel included, they feel happy. So that's the expected side of the map. Let's go to the unexpected side. So if you do the unexpected behavior, pushing others, body and eyes faced away from the line, talking to yourself, insisting on going first, wandering away, people may feel, especially the teacher, frustrated, stressed, worried that she's having a hard time getting the group organized. And then how do people treat you based on how they're thinking and feeling? You may hear an angry sounding voice. You may see a serious or upset looking face. And what you'll almost always find is that people nag you to do what you're supposed to do. And kids really like learning about what the word nag means and talking about the nag. So we explore the nag. We try to figure out how to avoid the nag. But that's where the nag comes in, is when you do something unexpected. And how do you feel about that? Or how does the kid who created the behavior feel about that? Because people are sounding angry, looking upset, and nagging them, they're like, why do people treat me so badly? I am frustrated, I am stressed, and I am angry that people are always mean to me. But so many of our kids with social learning challenges, what they don't get is that there's a whole connection between their behavior, how it affects others, and then how others affect them, and then they, in turn, it just continues how they affect others. So this is this is a poster we have, but we also, in the free article on the website, you'll see you can Xerox one of these templates, and they often go back to back. I have a book out there that gives like 52 different examples of some maps, but you get to create your own map. So parents, teachers, who's ever, psychologists, as you're listening to kids, you want to just zoom in on what is the situation. That's what goes on the top line, and that top line should be the same. The situation is the same whether you're on the expected or the unexpected side. And then you see the left column is the expected behaviors, the right column is the unexpected, and then the 3 columns after that are exactly the same on each side. It's just what triggers it. Is it expected behaviors that trigger how we feel? Is it the unexpected? So kind of what we're doing is we've got kids who often are black and white thinkers, so we're making for them a graphic visual template, and we're making things very concrete, more concrete perhaps than in real life, but then we try to help them see the connection into this gray. What you do affects how we feel. Feelings are usually considered more the gray area, the more vague area, and then how that generates how people feel about them and themselves. So social behavior mapping is getting a lot of attention at the level of, we usually start it with words at about 3rd grade and up. Before then, people start using the concepts of social behavior mapping with pictures, simple pictures of just what our behavior is and how it makes people feel. And what we're trying to teach is social emotional cause and effect. But what we've developed, or what I've developed in the social behavior mapping, is a tool that really teaches social responsibility. It's really impossible to be social in a vacuum. Like, social is a judgment. We think about each other. I can't tell you I have good social skills. Only you get to decide that. So we always have to be aware when we're teaching social, we're teaching behaviors that others are going to be interpreting. It's part of why theater is such a nice teaching approach with our kids, because theater is about understanding an audience is watching and how are you conveying your message. All that being said, there's these educational acronyms in public education in the United States. RTI is response to intervention, that's used within a classroom. Positive behavior instructional supports is something schools may adopt as part to encourage a positive and social community that affects each other in a proactive way. And social emotional learning relates to the importance of our social emotional learning as it impacts not only classroom behavior, but learning about perspective taking and emotions and cause and effect helps one to get better at inferencing, understanding critical thinking, and that then is attached to all of this is attached to the Common Core State Standards. So social thinking has been getting a lot of attention from mainstream schools, mainstream classrooms. We're actually getting attention from the business community. And we are serving kids from 4, and we say 4 because that's the age that you can really start using your language to think more about what's happening around you as old as they get. Our oldest client at our clinic is 72. We are based out of San Jose, California. We have a I have a little clinic, and then I have my regional larger clinic that I collaborate with, and then we have a big clinic or a growing clinic in social thinking called in Boston, called Social Thinking Boston. But we also have a lot of people who've been trained in our methodologies, attending workshops I've given all around for the last 15 years, and people have come to our clinic and trained. You can learn more about those people on our website under the professional tab. You can see what's called clinical training. We have a little list there of people who've tried to learn more about social thinking professionals from around the United States and the world. I think on the next slide, I'm just showing you the ranges of books. I did find that we needed to teach adults how to learn about social information, because none of us were directly taught it ourselves, so I don't remember being taught social. So we have a hard time formulating how do we organize the social process in order to teach it in a way that has some organization to it, to our students. But at this point, I think we're going to open it up to questions.
Michelle, you must have more energy than 10 people. I mean, that's an amazing, prodigious output. So thank you for bringing social training to the U.S. and the world, it would seem. Lots of questions here, and some pretty significant themes. Here's one from Frank. Our 10-year-old son does not appear to perceive that he has cognitive social deficits. He's excluded by others. He turns other students off by exaggerating, assigning blame, belittling, and he always attributes it to some other reason. And Frank's question is echoed by a number of other people who say that their child just doesn't seem to get it, no matter what they say or do. How should parents talk to their children about this?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's reminding me I want to come back and follow up on the question, the first one you asked too. Now that I've gone through the map, we'll come back to that one after this question. Okay. As everyone who's listening knows, there is no simple answer. There's no simple, I'll just do that and fix this problem. I mean, our kids are complex beings, each one of them individual, but I have definitely worked with a number of kids who can exaggerate, misstate the truth to protect themselves, and or just not understand the responsibility that we can see what's going on, but you're not reporting it the way that we're seeing it, and then you're being actively defensive. I'm going to answer the question kind of in two ways, and both of them are just going to lead to more, seeking more information. But one way is I have an article that's free on my website called the Social Thinking Social Communication Profile. And the profile from our work, we've noticed that, and I'm sure families, you've recognized that not all kids with social learning challenges have the same problem. So often what people want to do is have social skills groups where you put everybody of the same age and the same diagnosis or similar diagnosis in a group, and it often doesn't work because some kids are obviously less able socially and some kids are obviously more able but still missing the bar. And so in that article that we have, we talk about different levels of the social mind, and you're going to find different problems based on different levels. So as you're talking about a 10-year-old who's really not really navigating, his mind is not fully understanding the perspective-taking loop, that he probably can explain, I get it that you have thoughts, I get it, my thoughts are different, I just don't understand why everyone doesn't think my way. So that's kind of the gap, is that they'll go, yeah, I get it, but I'm right. Or, as I had a 35-year-old who seemed to be very argumentative explain to me, I'm not arguing, I'm just going to keep explaining until you believe me. And so with a kid who's not really buying in that they've got some challenges socially and they're just lashing out in more of a defensive way, it is very frustrating. But what I have had to learn, and this has been learning not because I did it well from the beginning, but because I didn't do it well, was that when I have argumentative or just kids who don't get the whole picture about how everybody is seeing them, I try a different strategy. Let me just back up and say this too. When we put kids in social skills group, there's our own hidden understanding, and we don't really say this to the kid, but a number of our brighter kids figure this out without us explaining it. I'm putting you in a social skills group because you are making us feel uncomfortable, and you need to learn how to behave so we can tolerate what you're doing a little bit more or accept you more. And we put the onus on the kid that they have to change their behavior in order for us to feel better about them. And while in an essence, there's some truth to that, a lot of our kids who are savvier and higher functioning, they just don't want it. They're just not mature enough to take on that responsibility. And, 10, 11, 12, 13-year-olds, they're challenging, even if they're neurotypical, they're challenging taking on responsibility. So what I came to do was I took the concept of social behavior map and I twisted it. And rather than me show a kid, here's the situation, here's what your unexpected behaviors are, here's what your expected behaviors are, what I did was I said, I took the same 4 columns, but I say to kids like this 10-year-old, tell me about one person that you call a friend or someone you like, can be adult, can be a kid, and tell me about a situation. So, for example, I had a very argumentative teenager who said, okay, he had this one friend, came over to his house and did video gaming. And then I said, tell me what is unexpected behavior that your friend does. Tell me what's expected behavior that your friend does when that person is at your house. And then I got this guy who refused to acknowledge there was anything he had to work on, but he was totally happy to go through this whole process as long as we were focusing on how smart he was about the situation. And so let me explain. What I mean by all of this is a number of our kids are not quite ready for us, or they haven't developed a deep enough relationship with their social skills or social thinking instructor. And so they're not quite ready for us to start saying, here's what you need to do, or they're tired of us telling them that. So we back it up and we say, well, let's figure out, I think you know a lot about social. I think you already know a lot about this process. I want you to tell me what's expected and what's unexpected behavior for your friends. How about for your parents, if you're willing, your teacher, and then get this kid to say, here's what they do that's expected, here's what's unexpected in this situation, here's how it makes me feel, here's how I treat them, here's how they probably feel themselves. And what you're doing is showing your kids slowly that they actually are living and breathing the same expectations everyone else has for them. And the point in doing this is to move away from, you need to change your behavior from us, to backing it up and going, hey, you're a pretty decent social thinker. You've got a lot of these good ideas. Wow, that's really cool. And then we slowly kind of go, do you think other people have these same kind of ideas? And then we try to walk them into the fact that we collectively as people have these expectations for each other. Now, it's not quite this simple either, because a number of our folks have social competency issues that when you really look at how they're hanging out with their peer group, they're not really matching the subtleties of what's expected. And then we have to start teaching them about how their behavior, how other people affect them and how they're affecting other people. And the bottom line is we're always working with students of all ages, adults, teenagers, kids, to be better social observers, because our kids with ADHD and like disabilities are so quick to verbally respond, but they may not have really tuned into the situation. And so then they're just kind of lashing out or defending themselves without really taking that time to see what's going on around them. So just like you do in executive functioning, stop and think, assess what's going on around you, we have to do that in the social information as well. I hope that my answer is clearer than mud. I flew in last night on a very late flight.
No.
And
I think that, that's a good example of how to help. But for many parents, it's just really hard to know how to intervene and what to do other than, do you recommend that parents not try to teach social behavior? Because many questions say, what can I say or do that will give my child help? Do you think it's better to find a professional or a social thinking group?
I think parents are critical in this. I mean, I think that's part of parenting to begin with, is to guide social behavior. I think the difference is parents of typical kids guide social behavior, and parents of kids with social learning challenges have to actually teach social behavior. And it always, of course, depends on the relationship, but I think that's the job of a parent, is to help with social relationships. Okay. I honestly think social thinking became known as it is today because parents found it so useful that they were the first ones to let everyone else know this is helpful stuff. So all of my materials are written for parents and professionals. To date, I don't have a book out that says, here professionals read this, here parents read this. Now, parents have been saying, we wish you would write the book for parents, but we've written in all the materials I write are pretty folksy. And I think the key piece is, there's kind of two things going on is, of course, in the moment, it's incredibly frustrating. You know, I've raised two typical kids, but I was not without a lot of frustration with argumentative, behaviors, nothing like parents are experiencing with these kids who lack the full awareness. But as I think parents, there's two things going on, and one is that we have to deal with what's happening in the moment, which is frustrating because with our really verbal kids, it just often turns into a circular argument, like you're not going anywhere with it. And then a parent modeled this for me so well. She just said to her kid, my ears just are really tired. I just need to step away from this right now. You just need to disengage from an argument that's just going nowhere. Because our kids they take you in, and part of this is, and I'm keenly aware right now that I'm speaking to 800 people who have 800 different experiences.
Absolutely.
So whatever I'm going to say, each person's going to interpret it a little bit differently. But let me back up and say there's the social learning process that underneath this is just going to take increased time and maturity. Maturity usually is our kid's friend. We need to keep putting the concepts out there for them. In the moment, we have to have our own expectations about how much we are talking to them. We need to be very aware that, I know what I was going to say, and it was important. A number of our kids struggle to make connections with peers. And as much as they want to make connections with peers, and many of them are so socially motivated, they're just a beat off, and the peers are not being so generous in their returning their attentions. So a lot of times the majority of attention our kids get is by talking to adults. And so if they can perpetuate a long argument, what they're doing is getting, in part, reinforced because the adult is holding their attention onto that kid. Mm-hmm. And so that becomes challenging because we give our kids so much attention at the point of dissension and not enough attention at the point when they're doing things well. So that's kind of the balance of social powers, and we want to be just very aware when we have kids that are super challenging, how we try to cut down on some of our engagement that's going nowhere and try to really increase our engagement when the kids are doing what's expected. The social behavior mapping is one of many, many tools I've made, but it's one I wanted to show you guys because it kind of is,
it points out what the right behavior is, which is great. Yeah,
right. And it's at the core. Yeah. It also shows that we're connected. Like anything you do affects me. And so like when I parented, I put up a little sign in the house, how to avoid my nag. And when my kids were, middle school, high school, it was like, how to avoid my nag. When you do this, I will nag you. Let me show you why. And then my kids thought it was pretty funny, but it was like, really, don't tell me not to nag you. You've begged me to nag you by doing all this unexpected stuff. So just be aware of the balance of powers. Let me also mention, I've written a book, and I've written many, many articles, so don't feel like you have to get a book. I have so much free stuff on the website, but there is one called Socially Curious, Curiously Social, and we wrote it to teenagers in a teenage voice. But what we found is if parents read the book, it gives them the language to talk about the social information in the vernacular of kids, in the language of kids. So you don't have to read like an adult book and try to interpret it to kids. We're actually speaking to kids about the social emotional connection through this.
What would be an example, Michelle, of something that we'd be putting in kids speak?
Oh, gosh. Well, we talk a lot about the boring moment. Mm-hmm. And so, for example, the adult speak is you go to school, you learn, it's great to learn, that's what school is about. Kids speak is, I'm bored in school, I hate my teacher, school is stupid. And so we enter at the level of kids speak, which is rather than saying, this class is really interesting, if you just paid attention, you'd love it, we say, how are you going to deal with the boring moment? Because there are boring things out there.
Right. In terms of parental involvement, Meryl has posted an interesting technique that she uses in her family, and I wondered what you thought about this. Currently, we provide our son a yellow card, friendly warning. that has 3 questions about the offense that we're noticing: the tone of voice, 2 words, or throwing things. And then it has things to do to stop the behavior, take a break, put your head down. But, how do you feel about that? Is it too negative? And Meryl is also wondering, how do we get my child to recognize it when I'm not there to give them the cues? And they don't seem to they don't pick up the cues themselves.
Yeah, so I can't specifically address Meryl's question because I don't know her child, and each child comes at it, like I mentioned, there's different levels of the social mind, but I think the idea of being able to make explicit tools that give really clear cause and effect and then give choices is really important, and I like what Meryl did in terms of saying, here are some choices when you're feeling stressed out. I think one of the things that precedes all behavior is often an emotional place, especially when kids are at the place of melting down. So you might want to be able to plug in there, how is this kid feeling, and getting him to catch how he's zooming in on how he's feeling. There's a really nice book out there called The Zones of Regulation that help to tune in on that. The one thing that, and I think, Meryl probably threw this out there as what she's doing in that, what I call the crappy moments. I know not everyone likes to use that word, but I talk to kids in kind of real kid speak, and these are the crappy moments when things are just going down. And that on the flip side of it, you absolutely need to pair it with the positive. So when you see your child feeling stressed and hanging in there, then how do you how do you really make yourself take the time to acknowledge that? Because we save most of our energy for how we're going to acknowledge so much of the crappy stuff going on.
Right.
So making sure that that's paired is great. I want to go back right now for a quick moment to the initial question about the kids stalking. Now that we've gone through social mapping and we're talking about different levels of mind, when a kid is really following around and stalking other kids, they either don't know the social expectations, and they probably have tried. So my questions for this kid would be a few if I'm working with a kid like this. And one is, does this kid, I'm going to guess that the kid being talked about is a very literal kid. He's a big rule follower. He is a rule follower according to, there's many of our kids who will tell everyone that they're breaking the rules. It doesn't mean they're following the rules well themselves. But I'm going to guess that this kid is really literal. He's probably a pretty awkward kid, and people probably notice his awkwardness, and he now has sexual yearnings, and he's just without the ability to take strong perspective, because kids who are more literal really lack in the ability to quickly jump in other people's minds. He's just literally following his own lead as to who is interesting to him, and he's just standing there and staring at them and following them, and he's not understanding how it's making people feel. And when we try to teach him that, it's not a quick lesson because the issues are much, much deeper. Like this kid may be blurting out in class, and we treated that as always blurting out in class as a different issue, but they're all connected. Like if you're not really aware of your environment and there are many high level kids who blurt too, but if this kid's just really awkward in his class, and now we're surprised that he's stalking folks, what I would recommend for that kid, now if this kid is higher and he's not like a really literal kid who's scientifically really bright but gets no inferences and stuff, if he's a higher kid, then we really need to work with him. The social behavior map, I think for all these kids can be really helpful. I had a kid who was a higher kid who was just staring at a girl he liked constantly, and then she completely nailed him on her Facebook page, which was awful because she called him out to the whole community. And he had no idea that him looking at somebody was seen as an offense. And so we really had to walk it through the whole where she's coming from, and then even further about the whole fear about somebody possibly, the trust issue. If you're staring at me, you're violating me, and how that works. It gets pretty complicated. Pam and I are actually going to start giving a workshop on part of this. It's on a day called Hot Topics. We're going to be addressing some of the issues around sexuality and dating because so few people talk about them, and they really,
absolutely,
it's a big problem.
Yeah, absolutely. Can we turn for a second to how to engage the school? Numerous parents have asked what the best way to bring these issues to the classroom is. How do you approach classroom teachers? How do you engage others? adults that are with your child when you're not there to be involved, to help in this social skills area.
Right. I've done quite a bit of writing on this on the articles, some of the articles I have. Under Michelle's blog, too, on my website, you can get a lot of different, I've written a lot of things about kids and parents and strategies. But let me now try to answer it. I just want you to know there's more information than this quick answer. There's a number of ways to answer it. One is if you're in public school, they have most school districts, all but I think 6 or 7 or maybe 8 of them have now accepted the Common Core standards across the United States, one set of standards across the U.S. And what I really like now about the Common Core is they have something called the Speaking and Listening Standard, which is a standard about social communication in the classroom. It's the first time we have a universal standard about social communication in the classroom as to if this child is relating at the level of his peers. And so that's one way to talk about this, is that if you can tie things to the academic standards, it gets people's attention way, way more than if you talk about it as behavior. And then there's the other language parents might want to use is find out if your school has a positive behavior PBIS plan. And if so, then you talk about it to the language of the school in terms of positive behavior supports and how do we help my child be able to figure out how to navigate this. The reality is that each one of us is super egocentric, right? That's part of the social world. Every one of us is pretty egocentric, and we kind of judge what's going on based on our own experiences. So when you go to a teacher, if the child is good enough for the teacher's not going to be necessarily sensitive to note that while the kid is participating well enough in the class, he may be having a miserable time during the breaks or working in a group or playing on the playground because he's not causing enough problems to the teacher. And so that's where we want to kind of get into. The next place I look at is how does his child work as part of a group in a classroom. So even if he's pretty good across the day, he's pretty destructive or kids are just not accepting him depending on the child or she in the group. And then I always try to relate it back to something that the teacher can see in terms of academics and teaching. Well, that's not necessarily my belief system. I'm just trying to figure out how to speak the same language with them. And then I also bring in some of the research on this, that why we think test scores are so important. All schools have bought so much into test scores. What's real predictor of adult success are not only our grit and tenacity, but our ability to develop social relationships. So I often come back and meet with teams about this child's ability to actually develop social networks and relationships, because that's the number one indicator of success, happiness, calmer mental health. And,
wow.
And then if the teams are saying, well, he doesn't qualify for an IEP, then it's like, well, that's okay. You know, if you've been done down that road, or you haven't, or a 504 plan, which if you have a diagnosis of ADHD, they could possibly be eligible for a 504 plan. Then you just do it from the point of view of a caring culture. And where is the caring culture in the school that each child is an individual who needs to have a social network around that.
Okay.
Can I say one more thing about that?
Sure.
I also do a lot of work to connect. It's like some of your kids out there have real trouble with interpreting fiction, and they have trouble with inferencing, and they have trouble taking perspective of the characters. So their reading comprehension is not great, and their written expression is not great. But people often don't realize that the same problems that are making reading comprehension of literature hard are the exact same problems that's making social interaction hard. And so keep learning about this. Again, we've got materials that we can share on our website, because the more you can speak the language of the schools, it's just like any culture. As soon as you can understand how to speak the language of the culture, it's an easier way in. If you just come in just with a gauntlet, like you must do this, and they don't have any preparation for it, that doesn't often work out great either.
That's a great tip. Speaking their language, I think that makes so much sense. A number of parents are citing difficult behavior, specific behaviors that their children have. I'll give you some examples. Jocelyn, my son gets into his peer's face as a way to introduce himself, and it scares kids away. Another parent, my child repeatedly states the person's name over and over and over again to an incredibly annoying degree. Another person, my child talks nonstop and doesn't seem to doesn't understand that the other child's trying to say something.
Okay,
So
let's just
all
drop
these little behaviors, what advice do you have for parents?
Yeah. So in social thinking, we've created a lot of frameworks because what we don't do is just go treat each problem as its own little fire that we have to put out. We try to back up and think, what is it we need to teach from a deeper social learning base? We're very much about, like, if you don't understand math, we need to start teaching you some of the core concepts of math. We're not going to just jump you into calculus. We need to make sure you got the basics. And while everybody understands about math and reading, everyone understands you have to teach the basics first. In social, people historically haven't understood that you got to take kids and adults back to the basics to be able to move them forward. So when you're talking about getting in someone's face, we have a framework called the 4 steps of communication. And we teach the first thing, we do if we want to interact with another person is we figure out what we know about that person. Then we establish physical presence. And then we start to create the rules of kind of what are our bodies supposed to be doing. And then we work on the eyes as the third part. And then how do we use language to connect to others? So we make sure communication is not just talking, that it involves thinking, our physical movements, our bodies, our gestures, how close we stand, what we're doing with our arms, all of that. And then the eyes. And I have, again, written a lot about this for free on the website. So that's something I would be working with. Here's one of the challenges for some of the kids that your parents are dealing with is not all kids have social self-awareness. So if you have no awareness of how you're making someone feel because you're a nice guy who wants to, or gal, and you just really like people and you want to be really friendly, you think you're going up and talking to them even though you're invading their space. You think you're friendly, so you think people should interpret you as friendly. And what they don't realize is people are having what we call weird thoughts or uncomfortable thoughts about them because they invaded the space rule. And so we're always
I think that's exactly what's going on. Yeah.
The perspective-taking piece with kind of the rules about where do you actually have to stand. Now people go, okay, we explained it. Why doesn't he just do it? Well, he doesn't really have, or she, great self-awareness, so they're not able, if you don't have great self-awareness, you don't have great self-monitoring. And so then it comes into the next question is, how old is this kid, and is this somebody that we should be talking to the other kids about having a social learning disability? I'm not big into needing to throw out labels, but just helping everyone to know that just like you learn math and reading, our minds also learn our social abilities. And it's totally not cool to really make fun of someone because they're not learning math well, but why is it we think it's cool to make someone because they're not learning their social well? And if someone's making you feel uncomfortable, what all of my adult and teenage clients say is, man, if they would just tell me. So if you can just now train the mentors at school, I shouldn't say just because it's not that easy, but if we can identify some mentors on the campus who are the kids' age who can give them direct instruction, when you stand that close to me, you're making me feel uncomfortable. Please stand here. Because
it's very specific, right?
Yeah, be really, really direct about that. The same with the language. A technique that I use, none of this is a slam dunk. There are no quick fixes, but these are all processes, and this is also part of our assessment as to how much awareness this kid has. If a kid is going up and just saying his name over and over and over again, we want to rule out that this is just not OCD, and again, just is the wrong word here. It's not OCD, and that he has no control, very little control over a compulsion. Versus this kid is trying to get someone's attention and he doesn't know any other way than to say his name over and over again, because when he does it, he gets this big reaction. So he thinks he's getting social attention because people are noticing him. It depends. Each kid's different, so I can't really, obviously say for what that kid is, but it's the different ways we think about it. And so if I have a kid who I think just does not have awareness of how he's making someone feel, I often encourage the parent or a trusted teacher or clinician to work with them and just be very casual, be very typical, normal situation with them, and then just start saying his name over and over and over again. And he'll go, whoa, what are you doing? And then you just keep saying his name, and then you say, how's it make? Are you having a feeling? Yeah, I'm getting annoyed. Stop saying my name over and over again. Oh, how's that making you feel? I don't like it. Oh. And the key with a lot of our kids is that until they personally experience the emotion they're making other people feel, they struggle to understand the perspective of others. So I'm not saying go drive your kids crazy, but at the right time, in the right place, while you're ready to have a learning moment, do a little bit of the behavior that he's doing or she's doing that's making it really uncomfortable, but be there then to take it into that, oh, you don't like that? Okay, that's making you feel anxious? I wonder how other people feel when that's happening. I had a young adult I was just doing that with who's working at a department's grocery store, and he moves the carts around and stuff, and he was doing some really unfortunate behaviors. But when I started doing them with him, he was like, oh my God, I had no idea that this is how it feels.
Right.
So, I think one of the things for teaching social thinking that you want to do is you always want to avoid assumption. The key thing about our social interactions is that we're always assuming how someone else feels. We assume someone else would know means what they're saying. And that's how the social code works, is it's all based on inferences and assumptions. Once you're working with a kid who doesn't have, or an adult, great social learning abilities, he's not getting accepted in the way that he wants to, or others, hope he can feel good about himself, then you have to avoid assumptions that he knows as much as he does. And a lot of people will go, oh no, my kid's way too bright for you to teach him that. And it's like academic intelligence and social intelligence are on their own train track.
Completely different, right?
I think Dr. Goldman talked about there's only a 5% overlap between academic intelligence, like more of our science-based intelligence, and our social. So don't make assumptions because a person's really bright on testing that they're anything close to bright when it comes to figuring out the social world.
So that's a great tip, sort of have them experience what it feels like to have these behaviors directed at them.
Yeah. Carefully, though, because there can be a line where you're doing it vindictively and then mean spirits. If you are not in a decent mood that you can do it in a teaching moment and you're just so frustrated, then you just need to walk away at that moment. Or if he's on, some of these kids really do need behavior plans around it. They're just not high enough functioning to be able to have any awareness they're working off of. And so behaviorism tied to social thinking can be also very useful for kids at different types of kids.
Okay.
There was a person who also mentioned about if a kid talks on and on and on and on and on.
Right.
And one of the strategies that I do with that is we time it. We literally just say you have 5 seconds. When one of my high school kids, we call it 5-second sound bites. When kids get together and they start talking and someone says, how was your weekend? All they want is 5 seconds. They really don't want to know your weekend. They just want to know. They want you to give them something, right? And so I just had a kid in my office who talks literally on and on and on. And so we had him have to answer questions within 10 seconds. He didn't think he could even do it. But what you find when you time it is you get kids will jump faster to the main idea. So parents need to not feel, putting some of these structures in for sanity also helps kids learn what is relevant to be able to talk about. So you could say, hey, I want to talk to you after school, but you're going to get 10 seconds to answer, tell me about this or tell me about that. And of course, you're not going to do this every moment you're with them, but you might try that there's one time in the day where you do some timed responses to try to help.
That's really interesting. That I can see that sort of timing. They don't want a paragraph. They want a kind of different behavior that's also very troubling to 2 or 3 parents. Here's one example. My son doesn't lie to get out of trouble or even really lie at all. He just has to be the best all the time to the point of being delusional. Better at football than the Seahawks quarterback, whatever, and brags and exaggerates and turns off other kids. And this is one person. The second person says, my teenage daughter frequently lies about things to get attention and make herself appear to have social skills or have certain, things that are and that just makes her make her friends, turn away when they figure out that she's not telling the truth.
Right.
So these are examples of kids who I guess are covering up or, I don't know. Do you have thoughts on this kind of behavior?
There's the first kid you talked about tiptoes into, I'm not positive, but could tiptoe into perfectionism. There's a number of kids who've got social learning, executive functioning issues who are also uber perfectionistic. And
Right.
while they can understand, like if you explain, I'm human, I'm going to make mistakes, you're human, they'll go, oh yeah, I totally get that you're human and you should make mistakes. I just can't allow myself to. And so I would really turn you to the perfectionism literature around how to teach some of that. I think Carol Dweck's work on growth mindset is really important, and social thinking has naturally always been part of this, that it's not about what you know, it's about what you're learning. And so I also have a free blog on my website about kids' strengths and weaknesses. No one's good at everything. How do you map this out? So I think looking in that area of perfectionism in this short time we have left, and then the kids who are exaggerating kind of some ways goes back to the earlier question I had. It's super tricky. Our kids really want attention. You know, the idea that kids don't want attention, even quiet kids, because some kids are, quiet personality. They're just can be spacey. Everybody really wants attention. And so the question is, how do you get healthy attention? And, we've come up with some fun tools around this. One of them is called Superflex. It's a Superflex superhero curriculum where we get you elementary school kids to start to identify their unthinkables, like what's showing up in their brain that's trying to defeat their flexible thinking. So we have one called Goth the Destroyer of Fun. It will show up and make you insist that you have to win the game or insist you're better than everybody else. And then you work on, your Superflex works on strategies to defeat your Goth the Destroyer of Fun. We also have a bunch of these unthinkable characters. One's called Was Funny Once. Was Funny Once thinks he's hilarious all the time when we think at best he was funny once, and how to learn how to control your humor. And we have one called Space Invader for the kid who's into everybody's space and getting them to be able to start self-control over this little game we have where you're, defeating these imaginary, unthinkable, not so imaginary, but it's a cognitive behavioral approach. With my adults, they like this, or my teenagers, they like the same kind of ideas. How can we set something up that's kind of something we're trying to defeat in our minds, that's playful and fun to play around, or different ideas we've put out there. I certainly, while I'm not a parent of kids with learning differences, I certainly work so much with families, and I definitely relate to how hard this is and how much pain it is. And there is nothing simple we can do to fix it. I think what we really need to do is to pay attention. We need to really look at the social learning aspects of this, and what is it my kid understands and what don't they understand. And it's not a black or a white, that the kid can totally understand someone else has a different point of view, but their ability to reckon with that point of view, or to understand when they're being honest or when they're not being honest, are real difficulties, and that's what we call learning about the nuances. So right. We've kind of thrown the whole social skills stuff on its ear a little bit and said, let's move away from the black and the white of either you know it or you don't know it, and let's work into these gray areas. And also for families, it sounds like there's a lot of them out there. Maturity really is our kids' friends. They do need strategies and guidance. They need us to be more direct with them on explaining the social emotional connections, and not just assume that they understand what they're doing is frustrating you. A lot of my kids and my adults have said, I had no idea I was frustrating my parent. I was just trying to explain to them about my day. And so really, backing up yourselves as adults and taking a little bit of time to read how we can build concepts in our kids' minds and how to explain it to them more clearly is a big part of what social thinking is about.
Right, absolutely. There's so many great questions here. I wish we had more time. Michelle, I urge all of you to go to Michelle's site. She has written extremely useful books, both for parents and for children. And Michelle, thank you so much. And thank you everyone for attending today.
Take care. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
For more Attitude Podcast and information on living well with attention deficit, visit attitudemag.com. That's ADDITUDEMAG.com.